Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel and day 3 of vlognukah. This video is actually one of the last vlognukah videos that I am filming because it is my favorite books of the year and I wanted to give myself enough time to read as many books towards the end of the year as possible to make sure that we were getting an accurate list. Now, this is my first time doing a favorite books of the year list in a while, because if you didn't know, in 2022 I had a baby and so my last few reading years, due to pregnancy sickness and then also early motherhood, has just not been what it used to be. But something happened this year, guys. I think there are a few things that have contributed to this year being a big reading year for me. One, I stopped breastfeeding, which made evenings and nights much easier for me. So I definitely found myself reading more in the evenings instead of just being attached to my child. I quit my day job. I talked about it a lot, but with quitting sex ed and massively downsizing my business and my work, I've just had more time for me this year, and a lot of that me time has been spent reading. And then the third reason, which actually I think is the most important reason why I have been able to read more books this year, and that is because I haven't read any new Brandon Sanderson books. Because whilst, yes, the last few years I've read less books in terms of number of books, I also completely devoured the Mistborn series and the Stormlight Archive. And so I had no Brandon Sanderson to read this year until now, because obviously I'm now, come December, it came out on the 6th of December, knee deep in Wind and Truth, and so that is a 62-hour-long audiobook. So we had a good run, and then I'm doing the complete opposite thing that people do at the end of the year where they try and read as many short books as possible to hit their reading goal. No, I'm going to read the longest book that I've read all year and probably not even finish it this year, but I must know. So at the time of recording this, I have read 49 books. This is not only my best year of reading since becoming a mum in terms of number of books, but ever. Years ago, I would set myself the goal of 50 books. I think the closest maybe I ever got was late 30s or something, but I am fairly sure, I'm 100% certain that I am going to hit 50 books this year. So obviously you can follow me on Storygraph to keep up to date with the more details of my reading, and there's going to be a video in January looking at all of the data and the analytics that Storygraph gives you about your reading. Yum, yum, yum. I also read a lot of shorter books this year, which we will get to. It wasn't on purpose. It just so happened that I got really into a new series this year, and all of the books are sub 200 pages in that series. So we'll get into more of the data side of things in that January video, but in this video I just wanted to gush about my top 10 favorite books that I read in 2024. Do I have a single physical copy to show you? No, because either I got them from the library or I listened to the audiobook. So just me, guys. No pretty books to look at. I'm sorry, but also not sorry, because that's just how I read books. Before I get into my list, don't forget that I am gifting membership to my Patreon as my Hanukkah gift to you. There is a link in the description where you can find a Patreon post for this video, and all you have to do is become a free member, comment on that post, and then come January, I will be picking 8 winners per day, per comment section of videos. 64 winners total, 8 per video for the 8 days of Hanukkah/vlognukah. Info, links in the description. Let's crack on with my fave books. And that's all. Let's hope that my earrings do not knock on my microphone. So these were all 5-star reads for me. Do I have any logic to the way that I do my star ratings? Not that I could describe. First up, we have All Systems Red by Martha Wells, and this is book 1 in the Murder Bot Diaries series. This is the series that I mentioned that has short books, although the next book that I have to read in the series is actually a normal length novel. But all of the ones that I've read so far, 1 to 4 I think, have been very short. Honestly, I think I gave all of the books in this series 5 stars, but I couldn't just like fill the list with Murderbot. So I'm just picking the first one because I actually don't know if I can differentiate between them all. So All Systems Red is a sci-fi about a security bot who hacks themselves so they're no longer under human control, algorithm control, and are basically entirely autonomous. What do they do with their newfound free will, you may ask? Well, they just download hundreds of hours of TV and just want to watch their TV shows and be left alone by the humans. This book, this series is just so funny, and it is so character driven because you're in the head of Murderbot. Like, they call themselves Murderbot, and yet they just keep accidentally saving humans. But Murderbot is just a very reluctant hero, hates talking to humans, gives major social anxiety vibes. If you like The Martian and like Project Hail Mary, it sometimes leans into those vibes where you get like really satisfying moments of sci-fi problem solving and figuring things out, and there being like a little bit of a mystery going on. But for the most part, the main appeal of this book is the character and the humour. It is such a unique narrative voice. I just find myself laughing out loud at the things that Murderbot thinks and says, but they really do not want to have to interact with humans more so than necessary, and yet they still find themselves creating bonds and friendships with other humans, with other bots, and it's just so precious and funny. They also just hate feeling emotion, and I think this quote is from one of the other books, but I laughed out loud. I'm going to paraphrase it because I don't think I can remember it perfectly, but there's this moment where Murderbot is witnessing something that is making them feel the feels, and then they just say, I had to excuse myself to feel an emotion. And I'm not even doing it justice there, but like the Murderbot Diaries, the books are so funny. I don't even need to tell you like about what the plot is. They have good plots. Just for anyone, I'm a plot gal, like if any other plot people need to be reassured, great plots, but it is just mostly like the character, the humour, the vibes, the relationships. I love these books. I love them so much. And there are so many more to read. Next up, we have Funny Story by Emily Henry, which is a contemporary romance. I am a big Emily Henry fan. I think I discovered her through my Patreon Discord server only last year, I think, but I have read a lot of her books now, and the new one that came out this year, I think, was Funny Story, and I think it might be my favourite Emily Henry. I loved this book. The romance premise is fun, it's silly, it's great. There is just beautiful chemistry between our two main characters. But the main appeal for me is the setting and the side characters, and you know, the friends make along the way. And like the kind of themes of this book really resonated with me in terms of like where I'm currently at in my life. There's just like a lot of stuff around small town community vibes, getting to know the people that live around you and near you, as well as the romance. The book is about someone getting to know her new local area and its people. And as someone who has been really trying to make more of an effort in building a bit of a local community for herself, this book just like hit me in the feels with all of that kind of stuff. And my favourite character was probably Ashley, because I felt like she was me. Her personality felt very familiar, and I love Ashley. Great book if you want some quality contemporary romance, and obviously I can't wait for whatever Emily Henry decides to write next. Next on my list, we have a non-fiction. Also, I should mention that this is in no particular order. Maybe it's in the order in which I read them, chronological order. So it is in a particular order. But this non-fiction book is The Transgender Issue by Sean Fay. We read it for my Patreon book club, where we read non-fiction books about sex and relationships and gender. This book is a manifesto. This book is a socialist argument for trans rights, and it is spectacular. It ties so much together, not just talking about gender, but talking about healthcare, homelessness, workers' rights. It's so good, and it is written beautifully, and it's just so concise and so powerful. Sean Fay is a spectacular writer. I Really love her writing, and she's got a new book coming out next year, I think, which I'm very excited for. But I just love how unapologetic this book is. It is so direct, so clear in what its argument is and what it's fighting for, and how everybody benefits from putting trans rights like at a focus and really making sure that we get shit right for trans people, and how looking at things through the lens of trans rights and trans liberation, we really liberate all of us. And it's a socialist argument, and it's great. Next, we have another non-fiction, which is Matrescence by Lucy Jones. This book was emotional, but it was brilliant. It was so validating. It is about motherhood, it's about pregnancy and childbirth, and it's just about all of the changes that your body and your mind and your social life and your relationships go through. It was a very intense and overwhelming read, but it was needed. It's a funny one in that I want everybody to read this, whether or not they are pregnant or have a kid, because like if you have got parents in your life, like if your friends have kids or if your partner is pregnant, like whatever it might be, like those people I feel also really need to know what on earth is even happening with their friends who are going through this huge transformation. It's so difficult to describe, and this book does such an amazing job. But whilst I would recommend it to like everyone else, I don't know if I would recommend it to somebody who is actually currently pregnant, like with their first, just because it might be quite scary, like a scary read. Like it's so hard, like where is the balance between knowledge is power and ignorance is bliss? That book really was like, ooh, I don't know. So I read it this year, so my kid was like turning 2 this year, and that felt like a good time for me to have read it. But there's still the odd thing in there that I was like, oh, I wish I had known this sooner. But most of it I felt like, oh, actually no, if I'd known this sooner, maybe I wouldn't. I don't know. Obviously everyone's experience of motherhood and pregnancy, and then also experience of maybe reading this book, will be unique. But if you are pregnant, tread with caution, you know, dip your toe in, maybe come back to it later. Maybe get your partner or your friends to read it and kind of read the book like filtered through them, maybe. I don't know, but brilliant book. Okay, we are back to some fiction. And my next fave was Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. I feel like this is just on a lot of people's fave lists this year. It's a fucking great book. It's about people who are video game developers and work in the video game industry, but it spans their like friendship and relationships over like a couple decades. I think it's set like in the 90s and noughties, which just the kind of the landscape and the background of really what the focus is what the characters are going through. But I just loved the kind of the setting of it all and the backdrop of it. But it touches on so many themes around friendship, creativity, integrity, mental health, disability, grief. There is a huge event that happens like halfway through, 2/3 into the book, that I was not expecting, and the book kind of like took a turn, but it still managed to handle it all beautifully, if not like, you know, emotionally. I was an emotional wreck. But whilst I never felt like particularly attached to the characters, and the characters don't feel that likable to me, the scope and just the depth that the book goes into, it's phenomenal. Brilliant book. Love. In a very different vibe, my next favourite is The Adventures of Amina Al-Sarafi by Shannon Chakraborty. And this is a fun pirate fantasy adventure where our main character is a middle-aged mum. The book is also very queer. It's got great mystery. I love the fantasy world. It's kind of like medieval, like our world, but with like spiritual, magic-y elements. But I don't even know if you'd call it medieval, because it's very much not like European history. And it's also hilarious. It is so funny, so warm, and I believe it's the first in the series, and I think maybe the second book is coming out next year, I think. But I'm very excited for it, and I'm definitely in. I am an Amina Al-Sarafi fan. My next fave is Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. Now this won, I think, the Women's Prize a few years ago, but I was never that intrigued by it. Honestly, I think the front cover of it made me think that it was like a Greek mythology kind of book. It is not that. I did not know what to expect going into this book, and it was very confusing at the beginning, but once the kind of like mystery element had been established, once the stakes had been established, once you kind of go, oh shit, that's what's happening here, I was like hooked. You see the whole story through fragments of what the character Piranesi knows. And so you're like slowly unraveling the mystery, but you, the reader, kind of grab hold of like what's really happening before the character does, which is very satisfying at points because then you're waiting for him to like figure it out. There's a lot of fun of like piecing the clues together and trying to figure out like how that thing connects to that thing. It's all about like other worlds, and there's like a cultish professor. The visual descriptions of the place, the house where Piranesi is just spectacular. I was listening to it just like, what is this place? There's like rooms and there's statues and there's like water and like, what is going on? It is a great book. I thoroughly enjoyed it as the mystery kind of revealed, and then it also kind of becomes a bit of a thriller, like action stakes, like very exciting, very intense. And then the ending is really interesting. I read this with a book club and we all kind of had different interpretations of like what was happening at the end and like what was real, what wasn't, and what happened to the characters and things. So that was really fun. And then also there just happened to be a Wally Range mention in the book because a lot of the kind of like in our real world bits, it's set in Manchester. And I grew up around the corner from Wally Range and you don't often hear Wally Range mentioned in books, and so I enjoyed that. Next is Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmus. And now that I'm saying this, I'm like, I read this at the beginning of the year. This is not in chronological order. So let's revoke that. This is in no particular order. I couldn't tell you what this order is. But I just found this book really moving. It was like an easy, satisfying read about Elizabeth Zott trying to be a woman chemist in, what was it, the 1960s, being undermined, undervalued, underappreciated, but there's just like a great supporting cast of characters, like her neighbor and her boss at work at the TV show where she presents a cooking show because cooking is chemistry. It just had a lot of good stuff in it. There was stuff about family and love. There was a bit of a like family mystery going on, and it's also one of those books that just kind of like had a satisfying ending in terms of like the baddies get their comeuppance, you know, maybe not realistic to what would have actually happened in the 1960s, but you know, as a reader wanting to kind of like feel a sense of triumph, it gives you that, which I appreciate. Next is I Love You, I Love You, I Love You by Laura Dockrell. I've been aware of Laura Dockrell's books for a while, but this is actually the first one of hers that I have read, and it was a glorious nostalgia trip. I feel like so much of the romance that I read is American, and Laura is a British writer. It's set in the UK, but also it goes between our characters in their 30s and then when they like first met and became friends when they were teenagers, and they're like roughly the same age, maybe a couple of years older than me, and so there's so much that I could relate to of like their teenage years, just all of their like cultural references, and it was so good. Just like what it's like being a teen in the UK in the noughties. It was just brilliant. It's a bit of a will they, won't they, unrequited love from teenage years, staying friends, falling apart, and then like re-finding each other in their 30s, but like, can they make it work? Can they, you know, will they, won't they, classic. But it was just so beautifully done. And I don't know what it was about this book, but it weirdly like didn't feel like a typical romance that I read. Like it didn't feel very tropey to me. It felt less like a rom-com and more like a like romantic drama, but it's definitely still like rom-com vibes because, you know, happily ever after and all that. It's not like a Nicholas Sparks book where they all fucking die in the end. You know, when I was a teenager, love me some Nicholas Sparks. But I'm not sure whether that's because you see the characters as teenagers, which is not something that I see in like the other romances that I've read. I don't think there was any spice in it, so it's not like that kind of romance. And I'm also like, is it because it's like British and not American, and so there's just like a general different like vibe, like it's a bit more chill, a bit more understated, but it's just beautiful, stunning. Loved this book. And then finally in my top 10, but stick around because I have some honourable mentions at the end. So these are other faves, but they didn't quite get 5 stars, but I like have to talk about them. But my final like 5-star fave of the year is The State of Affairs by Esther Perel. This is another non-fiction book that we read for my Patreon book club. And this book is all about rethinking infidelity. It is such a nuanced and compassionate book for a topic that people often have like really hard moralistic lines about how they feel about it. But it really gets you thinking and asking questions. And I just love that she isn't playing around with like, yeah, in an ideal world, no one would betray anyone. Everyone would, you know, adhere to the rules of the relationship agreement. No one would cheat, like that wouldn't happen. But she's a sex and relationship psychotherapist, and she's like, I'm dealing with reality here. And the reality is that people cheat for all different kinds of reasons, and it happens all of the time in all sorts of different dynamics, and there are all sorts of different outcomes, and it's just all of her insight and knowledge from working with people through infidelity and kind of like what she's learned. And then for people who haven't experienced infidelity or like in the relationship, you know, that may not have happened yet or whatever, kind of like giving you ideas for like conversations to have and things to do, not to like future-proof your relationship from infidelity, but even just to like have the conversations about it. And it's important to have those conversations whilst you're still in each other's good books, while you see each other in the best light and you assume that the other person doesn't actually like mean to harm you. But I just thought this book, along with Esther's other book and yeah, her writing and everything that she does around relationships, it's so great. I love her. She's brilliant, would recommend. Okay, honourable mentions. So for varying reasons, these books didn't quite reach the 5 stars for me, but they are ones that like have stuck with me this year, you know? So first off, The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Obviously, I became a Count of Monte Cristo fangirl this year. Love that book. Great book. If you want to know more of my thoughts on The Count of Monte Cristo, I did a whole reading vlog where I read that book, so you can find them there, but fabulous. And then I have an honourable mention for an author, which is Mona Awad. This year I read of hers Bunny and Rouge, and I just loved both of those books. Not my usual genre. It was kind of like creepy, horror, feminist, weird. Both of them fucking weird. But she's got another book called All's Well that I really want to read next year. So yeah, I think she's kind of like creeping up there to be like one of my fave authors based off 2 books. Love that. And then another honourable mention goes to ACOTAR. I read all of the current ACOTAR books that exist this year. Did I read them all this year? Maybe? I don't know. But my faves were Mist and Fury and Silver Flames. The rest are just like fine, but Mist and Fury and Silver Flames, even though I originally DNF'd Silver Flames and then I came back to it and was like, oh shit. So those 2 really fucking packed a punch for me. The others are fine. And then my final honourable mention is another series, which is the Broken Earth trilogy, which I listened to this year by N.K. Jemisin. This is another really cool fantasy series, really interesting magic that is like related to earth and heat and stone. And I don't know how to describe it, but the writing of this book was just so perfect for the world that it created. Like so many of the descriptions then related to like, I don't know, like earthly matters, like heat. It all just felt very physical. And I don't know how to describe it, but just the way that the magic in the world was, yeah, built and set up was fab. It had a very satisfying arc and ending. The structure of the timelines in the first book was just very cool, very unique. The format of it, it really reminded me of the way that the timelines work in Witcher season 1. Our protagonist in that series is also a middle-aged mum. So I'm just really into fantasy books where our like hero is not some teenage boy, but a middle-aged mum. More of that, please. So there we have it. Those are my favorite books that I have read in 2024 and some honourable mentions. Will I finish Wind and Truth by the end of this year? I'm assuming it's going to be a 5-starer because Brandon Sanderson really knows how to do a finale, but I don't want to speak too soon. But what were your favourite books of 2024? I would love to know. Please let me know in the comments. And then also, based on these faves, what books do you think I should be reading in 2025? I'd love to hear your recommendations. If you are on Storygraph, it is basically a better and independently run version of Goodreads. Please do follow me there. Would recommend, and they give you beautiful graphs and data and stuff about your reading. There will be a video about that next year in January. And little plug for my Patreon, because if you join my Patreon, we have the Patreon book club, obviously, but that is going to be running again next year. And in the Common Room Discord server, there's just a huge community of people there who are massive book nerds, love talking about books, recommending books, discussing books, and we actually created a TCR, TBR recommendations list, like as a community, and there is going to be a future vlognukah video featuring a lot of those books, the ones that I have not read. So come join us over there. And when you join the Patreon as well, you will get the TCR, TBR list as a little joining present, so you get a little like bookish introduction to the community. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this little rundown, and I'll see you tomorrow for another vlognukah video. Bye!